Hello and welcome to Accredited Real Estate Schools. This is Bryan Church. I'm a licensed real estate broker in California, also one of the instructors. We have Accredited Real Estate Schools. So let's go ahead and look at California Real Estate License State Exam Practice Questions, Part 9. Question number 1. A property encumbered by a trust deed is sold. A preliminary title report would show A, the buyer as the trustor of that deed of trust. B, the buyer as trustee of that deed of trust. C, the seller as trustor of that deed of trust. Or D, the seller as trustee of that deed of trust. Property is encumbered by a trust deed, so that means that trust deed, of course, is a loan. And this means just that there's a loan on the property. Now, when you're selling that property, what's going to happen is that after you have a buyer who's written up an offer, and there's of course an agreement, and there becomes a contract between the buyer and seller. We're going to probably open up escrow at that point, and then what's going to happen is you're going to go and get either through the escrow company and title, like in Northern California, or it might be just directly through the title company with a separate escrow company if you're down in Southern California. And what will happen is through that title company, you're going to get a preliminary title report. Now, this is an offer by the title insurance company to issue a policy of title insurance. And this is like a laundry list for us, for real estate professionals, to go through, find out what's going on with the property. And what happens is it shows all the stuff that's on the property, including the seller's existing loan. So that seller's existing loan that's on there will show up in the preliminary title report. And so the correct answer on this one is going to be, first of all, it's the seller, and it's going to be C as in Charlie, the seller as trustor of that deed of trust. So anyway, the seller as trustor of that deed of trust. So what we're looking at is what's existing on the property is the seller's existing loan, and the seller is the trustor who's the borrower. So you're looking at who is actually, the borrower, which of course is going to be the seller on this one, which is kind of interesting. So it's C as in Charlie, the seller as trustor of that deed of trust, and just be real careful with that one, because a lot of people will not understand that preliminary title report is actually dealing with the existing items on the property, which includes what the seller's loan that they may have on it. Okay, let's look at number 2. A real estate broker purposely withholds information from a principal. Of course, real estate broker, when we talk about real estate broker, we're talking about if you're a real estate salesperson, you're working under that broker. Or if you're a real estate broker, that would be you. And so the real estate broker is what we're talking about would be you. Purposely withholds information from a principal. And the principal, of course, is going to be your buyer or seller. That's your client. And this is called A, fraudulent misrepresentation. Well, yeah, but what about B, negligence? No, probably not, because you're not negligent, it's intentional. C, negative fraud, that's looking better. And then D, selective information. Now, the correct answer on this one is going to be negative fraud, and here's why. When the broker purposely withholds something, you have two types of, negligent misrepresentation, which you just flat out missed it, you just blew it. And there's intentional misrepresentation, which is a nice word for fraud. And in this case, since it purposely withholds the information, it will be, of course, fraud, which is going to be intentional misrepresentation. And so the correct answer on this is actually going to be C, negative fraud, because it's information that you withheld. It's called negative fraud if it's withheld. If it's not withheld, information that's not withheld, then it would just be regular fraud. But when you withhold information, it's called negative fraud. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to number 3. Flight patterns at the local airport have changed and now cross Baker's property, causing it to lose a substantial amount of value. As a result, Baker requests that the local government purchase his property. Baker's action is best described as, and the correct answer on this one is going to be inverse condemnation action. So what this means is that when a flight pattern comes across your property and causes it to lose value, right? Baker can actually go to the local government and says, you know what, I'm going to force you to buy my property. And that's through an inverse condemnation action. So they force the local government to buy the property based on the price what the property was before they caused the flight patterns to devalue his property. And so that's the actual process is inverse condemnation. Now, interestingly enough, the actual result of that you get there could be something called economic obsolescence. So you got to be real careful on this, because the actual result of it is economic obsolescence, which is a loss of value, which is caused by something outside the property line. So there's two different questions that come up on the state exam. One of them is inverse condemnation, when they actually force the action. And then another one will say there's a loss. What is that loss of value caused by? And then the correct answer on that one is economic obsolescence. So be very careful on this and look at both of those questions and make sure you get which one is which when you're going through the state exam. Okay, let's look at number 4. A $250,000 home is built in a $75,000 to $85,000 home area. Later, the owner decides to sell it, but can only sell it at a price well below $250,000 probably. His loss may be caused by, and the correct answer is going to be economic obsolescence. And the reason for this is because it's something outside the property line that causes a loss in value. And this is, of course, buying a property in an area where there's a lot of really less expensive homes. Now, there's another question on this exactly like this, that it asks you what appraisal principle is involved. And that, there, of course, is going to be the principle of regression. So be very careful here, because you'll have two different variations on this. One of them asks you losses caused by, which is economic obsolescence. But the other one is, what is the appraisal principle involved? So just be really, really careful with this one as well. Okay, when the Federal Reserve wants to obtain a tight money market, let's look at all 4 of the choices. A, it raises the discount rate and sells government bonds. B, it lowers the discount rate and sells government bonds. C, it lowers the discount rate and buys government bonds. D, it raises the discount rate and buys government bonds. Now, if you're not confused by this, you should be, because you're probably looking at what the heck. So what we're going to do is, I've got a little explanation here. We'll go over it real quick. Okay, so explain how all this works. Correct answer is going to be A, by the way. It raises the discount rate and sells government bonds. And let me explain how, and then we'll actually, that'll be very easy after you see how it works. The first thing, the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is a central bank for the United States of America. And this is where, of course, all the local banks and national banks go to the Federal Reserve. So when the Federal Reserve raises the discount rates, it causes banks to pay more to borrow money from the Fed. And it called, of course, the Federal Reserve the Fed. And the Fed is actually, what it does is it loans money to these local banks. And the money is going to be through what we call a discount rate. Now, there's 2 different rates that they use. They use a federal funds rate and a discount rate. And this is what they actually charge. On the state exam, they use the discount rate. And this is what the central bank, the Federal Reserve, charges local and national banks to borrow money from the Federal Reserve. Okay, so when they raise that discount rate, then banks have to pay more to borrow money from the Fed. And therefore, banks must increase the interest rates they charge on real estate loans, because if they're borrowing from the Federal Reserve at a certain interest rate, they have to put a margin on top of that to make a profit, and so it'll go higher. So as the Fed increases that discount rate, then they're going to end up having to pay, they're going to, of course, have to charge more for interest rates, and borrowers will have to pay more for that. This causes a tight money market with an increase in interest rates. So that's what they call a tight money market, because there's going to be higher interest rates, and that's a term that we use. The other one is the Fed also sells government bonds, which are treasuries. And when the Fed sells treasuries, which are treasury bonds, usually these are 10 and 30-year, the long-term ones, investors purchase these securities instead of using their available funds to make mortgage loans. Okay, so what happens is that if they sell treasury securities, and then people will go ahead and will buy those securities. Okay, and when they buy those securities, then that money is taken out of the money supply, since they cannot be used to make loans, and that, of course, causes a tightening of the mortgage market and an increase in interest rates on real estate loans again. This reason the Fed increases interest rates is generally to slow inflation. So that's what they actually use for that, and that's what the Federal Reserve does to do that. So let's go right back to where we were at and see the question. When the Federal Reserve wants to obtain a tight money market, A, it raises the discount rate. So now banks have to pay more money to borrow from the Fed, which then increases interest rates out there, and of course causes a tight money market. And they sell government bonds, which of course the money goes into the government bonds, is not available to make loans, and that causes an increase in interest rates as well. This is what they use a lot of times if there's inflation, trying to fight inflation. Okay, so anyway, that is the end of course number 9, and thank you very much.